Danny, how's it going?
What's going on, Dave?
It's been a few interviews recently, and usually we try to space these out, and we got some really exciting interviews that I'm really happy with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so grateful that I actually have the free time to be on these as much as I can, for
hmm
our channel, but also for the audience that are watching this. It's been great to be able to keep up with some of the stuff. So, love it.
Yeah. So, anything that you got going on that you want to give us updates on? I know you're on the channel almost weekly now when it comes to our live shows.
Yeah, so me and you were just talking about maybe trying to revamp the podcast a little bit for my channel, the personal development side of things.
Now, for those that have not seen personal development on your channel, can you just give us a quick overshoot of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those of you that don't know, the Danny Vega show, that's my channel. Just go ahead and check it out. Do a bunch of reviews. But the actual podcast is TDV Live, stands for the Danny Vega Live. And what I do is I have guests, not anyone super famous or anything that some people idolize, and people think, oh, well, maybe they're not living up to their own of what they preach or whatnot. I get average people just like me and you that are actually making a difference in the community wherever they may reside, right? And then also their definition of success, how do they become in their roles, etc. So we've had our good friend Ryan Robertson, who's an actor slash stuntman in Atlanta, Georgia. Crystal Alexandria, she won, I think it was best editing or best directing for a documentary that she did, which was absolutely incredible. And she's partially deaf, so how does she use her basically ailment, if you will, as a superpower, right? How does it help her and all this other jazz? So it's people overcoming real life challenges that you never really get to see from others. And so
Mhm.
how they become successful and share the tips and tricks of how they got there with you, the audience. So
Wow,
yeah,
the real superheroes in life.
correct.
Yeah. So yeah, that sounds like an awesome show. That's definitely worth checking out. So hopefully we'll start seeing those pop up a lot more often then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the goal.
Alrighty. So behind the mask, we've had on the channel before a behind the mask cast reunion, which was really good. We had a video shout out from Robin England on that video. Kane showed up, Nathan, Ben, Angela, everybody was here for that. And I have to say, we've talked about the movie fairly a lot. Taylor Gentry shows up in our final girls list as top 5 because she's the perfect bridge between what we saw in the 70s and what we see today. So it's an honor to have this next person on the channel here. So I may get a little starstruck, but it's David Stevie. He is the inspiration for a lot of stuff that we've done here. That's thus the name behind the mask for our interview show. So he will be joining us in just a few seconds. What happened out of that is we did our interviews, and then COVID happened, and then we was like, hey, you know what? Maybe we can do some sort of relief for people. So we started filming, showing screenings of movies on Facebook until they shut us down, and essentially we grew out of that and did interviews on that channel as Women of Horror, which was our previous name. And then I took some time off because, you know what, COVID was rough for everybody. So it was a little rough for me towards the end there. So we took some time off. We came back, rebranded, and we've done some special things. Hello, welcome.
Hey,
Woo.
boys.
Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here, and it's an honor.
Yes.
Well, the honor is mine. I always love talking to fellow horror fans.
Awesome. So, before we dive into things, did you just want to give a quick intro of yourself and what you've done for Behind the Mask and what you're doing in the industry today?
Oh man, wow! How do you distill your life down into a soundbite? I mean, I've been a screenwriter, kind of my whole life. Took me a while to discover that, but Behind the Mask is the thing I'm obviously the most proud of. To be a part of something that's had the longevity and the reach, and the unbelievably rabid and loyal and just, I mean, humbling fan base. that's obviously the feather in my cap this far. But I love all things horror, love all things films, and love all things storytelling. It's what prompted me to move from little tiny small town in Wisconsin out to the land of dreams, out to Los Angeles. So here I am 20 some years later, and still upright, still fighting the creative fight. But it's things like this that remind me that the things you do, actually sometimes you get through to people, sometimes you reach people, and it's just really humbling, and I'm so glad to be here with you guys.
Yeah. I got my Behind the Mask shirt on there, so I'm glad that we finally have some treads to wear. But I remember when this movie first dropped out, I worked at Blockbuster, and I worked 2 jobs at the time. So it was often I was working 6 a.m. to 12 a.m. or 1 a.m., depending on if it was the weekend. And this was one of the movies that I grabbed, and I went home. It's like, yeah, this sounds really interesting. I popped it on at 1 in the morning. I'm so tired that I fell asleep on it. But it's one of those movies where I woke up and it's like, crap, now I got to rewind it and start from where I was at before. And I actually finished it at like 4 in the morning because I was just so hooked on that movie and the concept. So
oh man, I hope you didn't wake up and like spoil the twist and then like ruin it for yourself.
Almost. I was almost at the end where I woke up and then I rewinded it and started it over. So it was. That
reminds me though. I've done the same thing, but I've fallen asleep. Like I'm a huge sucker for. Oh man, putting this on tape. I can't believe it. I'm a huge fan of Hallmark Christmas movies. Like I'll just put it on like ambience in the background Christmas time, and I fell asleep watching a Hallmark movie, and then woke up and was watching the end of it. I'm like, this doesn't seem right. Like I don't remember that person, but like, all right, that works. And then I was like, oh crap, I saw the beginning of one and the end of another, but it just sort of flowed in. So yeah.
The worst experience that I ever had doing that while working the 2 jobs was falling asleep on Candyman the first time I watched it and waking up on the crib scene. And I was like, oh my God, this is horrific. That's a horrible way to wake up.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, did you just rewind it on the VCR, Dave, or did you have one of those rewind machines?
No, when I rewind it, it was on DVD, so I was able to go back.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, manual rewind on the DVD. So
you were in the DVD Blockbuster phase. You're not quite as old as me. You were actually the DVD window. Okay, I got it.
Yep.
I got you.
Yep. We were. I started maybe a few years before we started phasing out VHS over there. So I miss it.
These kids have no idea what we're talking about. They're like, what are VHSs and DVDs? What is a VCR?
Be kind, rewind. What is Be Kind, rewind?
What is a rewind machine? Yeah, when you just actually put the tape in there so you don't ruin the movie, and you actually do that, and it rewinds properly.
Yeah. I think DVD is the perfect media for it. I know a lot of people love VHS, but DVD is perfect because you can get behind the scenes, you can get outtakes, a lot of great content.
Commentary.
Yep. Commentary.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of great outtakes and behind the scenes stuff that's on the Behind the Mask DVD that wasn't included in the movie, so those are definitely worth checking out. The best scene, maybe you're probably going to know what I'm going to say, David, is where Nathan is explaining how the killer catches up to somebody. It's like
the run walk.
Yep. That is a great scene.
Well, the funny thing about the run walk scene is that that was one of the first scenes that I wrote, and that was one of the first deconstructions that came up. Because it's it's like, of course, that's like the standard issue for a slasher fare, right? And Scott Glosserman, Scotty tried every possible way, like to film it, like long lens, up close, mobile camera, like over the shoulder, like. And it just didn't work. Like we just couldn't get it. It just didn't play well to try to capture that moment. And you sort of salvage some of it for like I think it ends up finally in like a preview trailer type situation, and then some deleted scenes. But the run walk is like that's the one that we couldn't quite get like cinematically up to par to make the actual film. But that's one of my favorite deconstruction moments in it.
Yeah, wow. I love that scene. All right, let's dive into some questions. So we're going to save Behind the Mask stuff a little bit later on. But my first question for you, David, is how long have you been writing? Have you always been writing, or is this something that you just fell into, or you've been doing it since a kid?
So when I went to, I kind of started toying around with tinkering and writing, and that creative sort of process in high school, and just didn't really know, like writing poetry, bad poetry, and short stories, and it was awful. And then I went to college at the University of Wisconsin, and got into the creative writing program there. And at that point, I was, learning story structure and how to write short stories. And it's a workshop format, so you're writing all the time, and you get feedback from your fellow students. And we all wrote our road trip stories and all that bad stuff. And then I thought I was going to be a novelist. I was like, okay, well, clearly, I have to write a book. And I was toying around with that. And then I was working at a movie theater, this beautiful theater in Madison called the Orpheum. It was one of those old school, red velvet seats, giant balcony. It was a stage theater that they converted into a movie theater, but it's an Orpheum theater. And before that, I had worked at the video store that I worked at in West Bend was the Pick and Save grocery store that had the video department like next to the liquor department. And so I had worked in a video store, and then I was working in a movie theater in college, and I'm standing in the back of the movie theater one night in college, and I'm just thinking, like I couldn't figure out this writing the novel thing. I'm like, God, this seems like, I don't know if this is the right thing. And it just sort of had this sort of gobsmack moment where I was like, wow, I've always been around movies. Like I worked in a movie theater. I worked, I was like an actor kid when I was younger, like in middle school and high school. And I've always been around that sort of, 2 hour sort of digestible story. Right. And I was just standing there going, I got to write a screenplay. Like this is what I've been missing. But I was so deep into my college career at that point that I'm like, I can't start over and learn to go back to film school. Like I couldn't go back to that department.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to basically post-graduation, although I got my creative writing degree in English, which, was immeasurably valuable from a story structure and a mythology structure, which I can talk about that for a whole other interview. But I had to kind of re-rack a little bit and say, okay, now I need to reapply everything I learned to how do I do this in a 110-page script. So I'm reading books by Sid Field and Lou Hunter and Robert McKee and all the greats, right? So I'm soaking up all of this stuff about screenwriting after having just spent 4+ years, getting an English degree. And so I wrote my first screenplay in 1994, 95. It got some good traction. There was a thing at that time called the Chesterfield Film Project, which is a pretty big deal. I was a finalist in that, and then that was really encouraging. And but it's the film industry, so you send it off and you get feedback and nothing happens. But I went on and I kept writing, and then just lo and behold, one day I had the idea for Behind the Mask, and that was 1999, 2000. It was 2000, and that was kind of the one that was sort of a rocket ship that there are no overnight successes in Hollywood. Not that I'm an overnight success, but you have to struggle and work so long and write so much stuff just to kind of get a shot. So it was 1994 when I finished my first script, and then 2004, so 10 years later, when Scott got the green light for Behind the Mask.
Wow. Yeah, it's so important to hear these types of stories because a lot of people think it's going to be an overnight sensation, especially with the way social media and everything works today.
Yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking because people think, well, don't get me started on that, but I mean, you cannot gauge your success against anyone else's, period, full stop. You do the work and you do the best you can, and you rise and fall on the merits of what you've done. It has absolutely nothing to do with anybody else's timeline.
Yeah, that's one thing. I'm glad you said that, because even myself and other creative people, it's just like, how long is enough? You know what I mean? Before you start to get tired and you're like, do I really give up? Is this really worth it? But to your testament is just like, keep going. You know what I mean? Just keep going, because eventually something is gonna give. So I love that. I love that you share that with the audience here for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is no finish line. There is no finish line. There's any creative person. I don't care if you're a songwriter, an actor, a sculptor, a painter, a cook. Doesn't matter. There is no finish line. You don't ever get to a point where you're like, this is it. I did it. That's the one. Thank you. I'm a screenwriter now. Like, it doesn't happen. You finish one. It sounds crazy, but Matt Damon doesn't. Sure, he's got an easier road of it, but Matt Damon doesn't get greenlit on everything he tries to do either. You know what I mean? Like, it's so there's no end point. You go until and you go until you decide you don't want to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then and I did that. I've quit a million times. I've quit screenwriting a dozen times in my life, where I've just walked away and said, I'm done. I'm never doing this again. And yeah, it pulls you back though. It keeps pulling you back because you can't ever stop.
Yeah,
just like The Godfather 3 always pulls me back.
Yep.
Alrighty. Well, because you already mentioned it though, I love that you gave us a whole background and stuff like that on that. But was there one definitive moment that you were just like, aha, this is my career now? Like I'm going all in. Like, and if it is, I know you briefly glossed over it, but like give us like a little bit more detail. Like what was that one thing you're like, this is all in, career done?
I think that what happened with Behind the Mask was really important. Two big reasons. One, it was a script that came very easily and very quickly to me. Like it just the concept came to me one night, and kind of while I was watching Halloween, and sort of dozed off thinking about, God, am I doing the right thing with my life? Like, what's happening? And I was having a lot of sort of existential doubt. And Halloween's playing, and I think I dozed off and had this weird, crazy thought of like, man, did Michael Myers ever like doubt if he was doing the right thing with his life? Like, what was that guy's like life like? And I had this image of like, was Michael Myers out mowing his lawn one day thinking, I gotta become an insurance salesman? And it's a sort of like crazy sort of fever dream, like comparing the analogy of what would it take to be a creative person for someone like, in a really obscure field, like being a slasher killer. And just boom, this whole thing sort of blossomed in my head. Like there's in Leslie Vernon, there's this guy who aspires to be the next killer, but he's not there yet. And he's got these idols, and he wants to be the next Michael or Jason, and those are his mentors. But he's struggling, and how does he get his foot in the door? And then he questions whether he's doing. So the whole idea of Leslie Vernon is just a metaphor for any creative person. And I think that's why it resonates so much with fans. But that moment when I wrote the whole first draft in maybe like 10 to 12 days or something, which is ridiculously fast. I've never done that anywhere even close to that ever again. And yeah, it was the first draft, so it needed a lot of work, but long story short, it did a lot of the lifting. Like the muses sort of did that. And then there was a moment where we got the movie made and everything was about to happen, and it's out there and it's getting good traction at South by, and it's getting good reviews, and all the horror press has picked up on it. So me and Scott and Nathan and everybody were like, here we go, like this is it, the rocket ship. And I got to bring the movie back to the Orpheum Theater where I'd worked. So now I'm standing in the back of the Orpheum Theater, full circle. Exactly, that's right, exactly right. And Danny, to your point, that was the moment I think where it was like standing in the theater that I worked at thinking I want to be a screenwriter, and now I'm watching people react to a movie that I wrote playing on the screen that I served popcorn and swept up the seats and all that. And that was the moment where I'm like, yeah, okay, if nothing else ever happens again, if this is it, I'm good. I can digest this for a long time.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, just hearing that, and I think it's funny because like you mentioned it, and me and Dave talked about it too, about social media and people wanting overnight successes and stuff like that. When we listen to some of the movie stars that done it, whatever, it's just like, but you don't remember what it's like to be this way. But for us as just humans, just sharing our experiences, and you hear, no, it's not BS. This is what we went through. This is the aha moments. This is where we got. That's just an incredible thing to share. That's awesome. I love it.
Yep. All right. So now it's been some time since you've brought one of your stories to the big screen or to the little screen or whatever screen we're playing it on today, our phones, anything.
Yeah,
but right now, you've not only written a new short film, but you've directed it as well. So Wait For It is coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about that short film and what we can expect to see it?
The idea for it was just an idea again that I had, we're surfing buddies, and I was out just sort of sitting there and thinking about it. I'm like, well, this is my version of name dropping, because I don't really get to name drop much, but through other writing, I got a meeting with Ryan Turek at Blumhouse, And sort of pitching him an idea of another script that I'd written. And in the conversations, he sort of asked, like, what else have you been working on? Have you ever directed anything? I'm like, no, I've never directed. It's never been a thing. I didn't think that was my bag. But I have this idea for a short film, and it's kind of about, like, I love slasher, so it's sort of about the tropes of, all the jump scares that we see in a horror movie, like, the door closing, the mirror, in the shower, the going down the stairs, turning the lights on, every single, driving a car, somebody's in the back seat, all those jump scare moments. I just had this idea. I'm like, wouldn't it be kind of funny to just go through the night of a survivor girl or a final girl? In my world, we call them survivor girls. Get into that later. But like, to go through the life of a final girl, like, what does she do on, like, on Sunday the 15th? You know what I mean? Like, what does she do? What does she do when she's trying to recover from a post-traumatic stress type situation, where she's just trying to live her life like on a Tuesday, like a week, like a year later, and she sort of knows the guy's probably coming back, but maybe she's just being paranoid. So just wanted to do this deconstruction. It was really just sort of a love letter to slasher, just to put together all these sort of, scare moments where you have to wait for it, right? And I'd mentioned that, and Ryan Turek was like, you absolutely have to direct it. And I was like, all right. I mean, I don't know how to point a camera. He's like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if nobody sees it. You need, as a screenwriter, you need to direct a film, because you need to know the cost of what you're doing. When you write exterior spaceship on a piece of paper, you need to understand what that translates to somebody having to actually make that happen, do the production design on it, shoot it, stage it, do the post effects on it. He was making a point, but it's like, you need to know, when you write and you put words on a page, you need to know, how do you actually get that from your brain to the page? That's the easy part.
Yeah.
How do you get from the page to the screen? And that was a great bit of advice. And so it took me forever. I mean, I had to pay for it myself and languish through, tried to do everything on a shoestring budget. And thank God, Frankie Guerrero, my DP, saved my ass. He made it look good, because I legitimately did not know how to operate a camera. Still don't. But the experience of it was invaluable from the perspective of as a storyteller and a screenwriter. Now, when I approach a script, I can say, all right, I can see how I'm kind of glossing over something just because I want to be done with this idea. And I want to get on to the next thing. It's like, okay, maybe think that through logistically a little bit, especially in a low budget horror world. So that was kind of a really critical part of the process. But as far as where you're going to be able to see Wait For It, honestly, I don't know. I have an executive producer named Chris Jarowski, who's awesome. Chris has gotten it out to all the festivals. He single-handedly willed this thing through its festival run. I'm really proud to say it's done really well. It's gotten a bunch of awards and notifications of things at festivals. But I don't know. Next step for us is to figure out how do we get it out there for people to see. So we're working on that. It's tough to try to monetize a short film. That's another thing I have to learn. It's a learning curve I'm on. So we're trying to figure out how to get it out to everybody. But at this point, it's not quite available yet. But I want it to be, and maybe ultimately, maybe someday it ends up as a DVD extra on another film or something. But God, I'd love to get it out to. I'd love to get it out to the masses. If anybody's got any input on there, I'd be all ears.
I think Danny, I can probably help you with some of the people that we may know. But the one thing that you said that I really appreciate hearing, we were just talking about this on a podcast yesterday, but in the time of this release a week ago, that we don't see the trauma that a final girl goes through. They just progress through the sequels and so forth. Now, they've tried to do it with Sydney and Scream. They never really pulled it off. And we're finally getting to see that in Terrifier with Sienna and her having the anxiety attacks and the trauma and stuff like that playing out. So this is a story that needs to be told and be on the screen. So thank you for putting something like that together. It's long overdue.
Yeah. I think also, to your point, Dave, is that the only one that we kind of see it play out that was kind of cool, but not on the level that you're doing, David, is the Halloween 2018 one, where it's all those years later. You see Laurie Strode, you know what I mean? She's still kind of like, she's over prepared just in case Michael ever comes back. But to your point, you never saw that gap. You never saw what she went through. Did she take pills? Did she go to therapy? Did she do this? You know, her training at the gun range. What inspired her to do that? Like, you don't ever see that. You just see that due to the trauma, she's here already. She's at the end point. You don't see that in between. So that is amazing. And especially like you said, when between sequels, right? Like any sequels, you don't see it. It just happens.
I think that to me, I didn't get to explore it as much as I want to. It's a 13-minute short film from a never done this before filmmaker. So don't expect too much. But I think what appeals to me about it since then, and things I want to explore subsequently are, it's not just the gun training and the therapy and the booze and all that stuff, but it's like, what about the moments where she does have some degree of normalcy? Like, Laurie Strode's a mother now and a grandmother. Like, there's thousands upon thousands of hours of normal stuff where maybe she got to forget for a little while. And how do you piece that together? How do you resolve that? And I think, to me, I think there's such a deep wellspring that hasn't been explored fully. I know we've had Final Girls and we've had a lot of films that do focus on the female. But I don't know. I think that we're entering a time and a place in our culture right now where it's time to start facing up to the fact that, I think Michael Myers is the greatest slasher killer of them all. And I think that's by and large because of Laurie Strode. And I think it's time we start to acknowledge that a great slasher killer really needs a great final girl. Like that the two go hand in hand. And I would argue that as great as Jason is, as great as Freddy Krueger is, in my opinion, the reason they can't quite get to the Michael Myers level in my head is because they don't have a reliable final girl. And I think that's the only short in Jason's game, the only short in Freddy's game. And they tried to do it with Nancy Thompson, right? But I think that a great slasher killer isn't a standalone mythological figure. I think it's a pair. So I would love to have that explored a little bit more.
Wait for us. Would you ever like to expand it to a feature film or have it remastered as a feature film? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
No. I mean, maybe, I guess in the pantheon of, in a Leslie Vernon universe, there's, I think that if there was going to be a feature film based on Wait For It and Darcy Van Doren is her name, the Survivor girl, she, I don't really have an interest in doing a standalone film just to start over again. I mean, to me, Leslie Vernon is where I want to invest my time and effort. I should clarify that, the nomenclature is Final Girl, right? But in Behind the Mask, there are no slasher films. So it's different than Scream. In Scream, there's references to horror films, but in Behind the Mask, there are no horror slasher films. Jason is a real guy, Freddy's a real guy, Michael's a real guy. So there was no book by Carol Clover. So there is no Final Girl in Leslie's universe, but the alternate reality parallels, they refer to them as Survivor Girl. So that was sort of intentional that, well, I admit it wasn't intentional. I think I messed up at some point writing it, and I thought Final Girl was Survivor Girl. But it worked out, Kismet worked out that you couldn't have a Final Girl in Leslie's universe because there is no slasher film, and therefore there's no book by Carol Clover.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Love that.
Very nice. Now, you kind of touched on it a little bit. So you've been working on Wait For It since 2015, and you mentioned there was times that you wanted to walk away. Now I don't know if that's happened while you were working on this, but what are some of the hurdles that you encountered during that process of getting from point A to where we're at today with this one?
Oh man, I mean, money and motivation. I think money and motivation kill most film projects. I think that when you run out of one or both, it's really hard to push yourself up off the pillow in the morning and be like, all right, I got to go do this. I think that some people are probably a little bit wired better to be like, no, I'm gonna beat this. This is a challenge. I'm gonna overcome it. I kind of wasn't. I needed a lot of people pushing me on, and be like, no, dude, you put a couple grand into this already. Case in point, my editor, my post-production supervisor, Craig Updike, like, I got the thing shot and filmed just because everybody else was pushing me to do it, and then I had the stuff sitting in the can for I don't know, 2 years, a year and a half, something like that.
Wow.
And then
Okay.
one night playing poker, Craig's like, I think because he's done a lot more post production stuff than I ever had, and he's like, I think we could do something with that. Why don't you let me take a look? And then Craig just took it. And he's like, no, you were like grabbing me by the collar. We're like, no, you need to come with me tonight, and we're going to go into the studio. And we're going to do this. And so I needed a lot of other people pushing me on and getting me to just sort of stop with the self-pity and the quitting. But that's my personality. I think a lot of other people are sort of self-starters and self-motivators, but I think the biggest hurdle is it's just so rife with failure. Like, 99% of every film project doesn't ever get to a screen in front of other people. It just doesn't. Or you get it on a laptop and you show your friends and your neighbors some night while standing around, before you watch another movie. You're like, this is what I did, check it out. And everyone like sort of like, good job, and they pat you on the back and you go watch the movie. So it's so rife with failure that it's really, really hard to keep yourself going.
I think you hit it on the head for people like myself and other creatives that have like either ADHD or some type of ism, right, and whatnot. That it's not something that you could motivate yourself out of, right? It, like you said, is sometimes it's even deeper, right? Whether it's your personality or an actual disorder and whatnot. And to your point, I think this is where having a team is overlooked, right? It's just like if you try to do everything yourself and you're not that type of person, or you have, like I said, a disorder and whatnot, you have to build a hell of a team to make these things come true. And then even if you're a self-motivator and self-starter, again, like you said, if you're taking all the financial burden by yourself, if you're doing all this by yourself, filming, editing, everything else, it does take its toll, and it's really, really hard. So I'm glad you said that too, for the audience to know. Build yourself a team, get yourself good people surrounded by you, not saying, oh, that's all right, you'll get them next time. It's like, no, let's go. You have this. I love
and
that.
It's really, really hard to ask for help. Like it's hard to ask for money. It's hard to ask for help. It's hard to be like, I'm tapped out. I can't do this anymore. Like, could you please? Do you know anybody that can please help me with this? Like, it's really, really hard because everybody's trying to do it. So we're all. And then the other thing is, a lot of people, like, if you ask people for help, there's also a frustration from the person you ask, because they're like, I want to help this guy, but I can't. Like, I don't have any resources. I don't know a guy. And so it's so, even there, like the landmines are everywhere, and you just got to keep plowing through it. And if you don't want to do it, if some part of you deep in your DNA doesn't love to do it, you're gonna quit. But man, you just got to dig deep and keep going. I know that's such a lame bit of advice, but that's the truth.
It sums up Danny's shirt perfectly. You're awesome, right? So
you're awesome.
Yep.
That's really cool. So speaking of which, what advice would you give people who share your passion for writing, when it comes to bringing their stories to life? How I usually ask these type of questions, whether it's filmmakers or writers, is how'd you get your start? And, advising people to either do the same, or because, the industry has evolved, what do you think their first steps should be to get into your position now?
So I've been asked this before, and I kind of sidestepped the answer a little bit, but there's a method to my madness, and I advocate for this specifically, and that is to treat screenwriting specifically. That's what we're talking about, screenwriting. I'm going to be dialed in really specifically on writing a script for a film. You have to treat it as it is a specific craft, and you have to give it the respect to learn how to do that craft. And it drives me absolutely up the wall. It drives me nuts when people constantly, when you're a screenwriter, one of the most common things you get when you tell somebody you're a screenwriter is like, oh, really? Oh, I have an idea for a script. And it just, every screenwriter cringes because they're like, oh, yeah, of course you do. But usually what they have is an idea they have an idea for a hook. They have an idea for a setup of a conflict. Or they have an idea for a cool character with no structure behind them. And so much of our culture, and I hate this, I don't know why it is, everybody seems to think that anybody can write a script. And you cannot. You cannot. I'm sorry. I'm going to be an arrogant asshole. I can't walk into Dodger Stadium tomorrow and be like, you know what? I played softball on my company's softball league for a while. I've watched a lot of baseball games. I want to try out for the Dodgers. I'm not going to walk into a a surgery center and be like, I watched a lot of medical dramas. Like, I want to try performing surgery on somebody. You don't walk into a restaurant and be like, I eat at a lot of restaurants. I think I could be a chef. But somehow it's okay for everybody to be like, well, I've watched a lot of movies, and I'm a really creative person. I could write a script. Yeah, sure, you could write a script, but you're not going to understand. There's a structure to it. There's reasons why things happen on certain pages, roughly. There's things you need to do to make sure that if you set something up, it needs to be paid off later, and there's things you cannot do, and people treat screenwriting as if anybody could do it just because you're creative. And that's just not true. It's not. And you need to treat screenwriting like the craft that it is. You need to learn the specific muscle sets for how to craft a scene. How do you get into the scene? How do you get out of the scene? How does your character speak? What's the dialogue you're using? What's your theme? People just think, oh, well, theme is one of those abstract things. Theme is not abstract. Theme is a very concrete, very specific reason for writing a script. And it just, I'm already feeling my face get hot. Like, it drives me crazy that people think that screenwriting is this, like, well, if you just write 3 or 4 scripts, you'll be fine. I mean, learn from the people who wrote scripts before you. Yeah, you got to read a lot of scripts. For sure, you got to read a lot of scripts. You can watch a lot of movies with the subtitles on. Absolutely. But you don't just get to absorb it by osmosis just because you sat down on your ass and watched a movie. You have to look at, like, well, what did that character say? When did they say it? What happens? Why did that person do that 45 minutes later? That doesn't jive with what they did over there. So I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox. But to answer your question, I guess, Danny, I think it's, buy a couple of books on screenwriting, or watch some actual courses. Don't YouTube how to write a script and watch the TikTok, 6 steps. Put the time in. Then you got to write a bunch of scripts, and they're going to be crap. And treat it like any other profession where it takes you a few years to get good at it.
Nice. And so for yourself, if you can name at least a couple books or anything that helped you on your journey, and then after that phase, let's say, for instance, someone does exactly what you say, what's the first step to get into the career path?
Oh man. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm going to date myself because, I came up with some of the, some of the stuff that I read was groundbreaking at the time, and it makes people cringe now because people say, oh, story by Robert McKee. Come on. That's so overdone. Right. I mentioned earlier, there's a guy named Lou Hunter who was a professor at UCLA who was one of the first sort of screenwriting gurus. I think one that holds up is it's called The Writer's Journey by Christopher Vogler. And The Writer's Journey by Vogler is something that is deeply rooted in Joseph Campbell's philosophies on mythology and story structure. And I think that's critical. So I'm going to go a step further and be like, get yourself immersed in Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, because that's some of the really core fundamental DNA type stuff of storytelling, which is then screenwriting. But if you're going to go to the television route, like I don't know a lot of good books. I haven't put the time in to learn that craft. And I think that there's probably good books out there now that I don't even know about, but that's sort of part of the process of discovery. The books that worked for me and then ones that I'm touting right now are not going to register for, a 24-year-old woman living in, Topeka right now. It's just not going to work for her. So it's part of the journey, and the process is you have to go through your writer's journey, and your writer's journey is to go out and find the books and read the books. And they're not all good, but you take a little something away from all of them, and then the collective, of all the books I've read, of all the scripts I've read, of all the things I've tried and failed, that's what's created my personal take on storytelling. And it took me years to accumulate that knowledge base. And so are there books that I can recommend? Sure. But reading those books should lead you to the next book that I don't know about that will work for you.
Awesome.
Great point. That's a great
as far as getting into the business, man, I don't know. It's changed so much. I mean, I'm like old guard, so I came up through the ranks of, like, you write a script and then you get it to a manager, and then the manager reads it and they get it to an agent, a literary agency, and then the literary agency gets to a meeting at a studio or with an indie producer, and you sit in a room and you talk about it. I don't even know if that happens anymore. I honestly, God, I don't know. Then so much digital filmmaking happens now, and there's so many other non-traditional routes. Like I don't know that people coming up right now are gonna write a script, try to get an agent, and then have the agent take it to production companies. I don't even know if that's the thing anymore. I really don't. But I can tell you this much: you got to keep writing scripts, because that's what you're selling, and that's the only thing you have. And the worst thing in the world is you get some traction with a script, and you go in, you get a meeting, or you're on a Zoom call, or you're having lunch with somebody. They're like, "This is good, but it's not for us. But we like your writing. What else do you have?" And that's never going to stop, because they're always going to be like, "Are you a flash in the pan? Do you have something else you can show me?" Like if you did one great one, that's good. If you got 3 or 4 good ones, I might not want to make any of those 3 scripts, but I'll tell you what, a year and a half from now, when I get another script from another guy or a girl that's not so great, I'm going to think of you to come back to rewrite it. So it's just, and again, that's part of investing time in the process too, where you have to get out and, networking is a thing, and it sucks. But the relationships that you have, I mean, most of the writing that I've done recently has been because of the relationships I've formulated over 20 some years.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. That's even like applying for a regular job. And presenting's like, well, I have work examples. I could show you my portfolio. So it's the same mindset. So I don't think anybody's ever kind of brought that up on the channel before. So having the multiple scripts out there as a part of your portfolio, that's really good to know about.
Yeah, you got to have a bunch of stuff, because it took you the time and the experience to write it. And you never know, the one that you thought was just okay might be the one that they're looking for.
Yeah. Another great point.
Yeah, that's incredible. Awesome.
Alrighty, so we're going to move into the Behind the Mask segment. We're going to ask some questions about that. A lot of questions that we're itching to ask. So we're going to play a brief intro, and then we'll be back in a few minutes. About 2 minutes. Hey!
Whoa!
Surprise!
What? Oh my God! I was just thinking about what nice things am I going to have to say about these 3.
Mind your P's and Q's, mister.
Dig deep, bro.
I honestly almost ruined the surprise. I'm so sorry.
Wow. It was originally meant to be a trilogy. So I don't know if you can really kind of give us an insight of what the full vision for the trilogy was, since we've seen the one and we have the comic book.
The vision was that